Hello, I wanted to talk to you today about something called the Treta Yuga. And the Treta Yuga refers to an ancient model taken from the Vedas of India. And it's a model of evolution, of the evolution of Gaia, if you like, of humanity. And it works through these four great epochs called yugas. And it's actually quite mathematically calculated in the ancient texts, and it's been revised in many ways. But essentially, we begin with perfection, and then we fall from perfection on this great arc in these cycles, and gradually we let go and we forget more and more until at the bottom we are at the kind of base where we have fallen completely into the material world, into the material plane, and we've actually just completely been separate from our spiritual origins. So we've got heaven and earth a long way apart from each other. But then we begin to ascend. The current begins to ascend and remember itself before it climbs up to the top. And then you have this synthesis, this gradual synthesizing of the material and the spiritual, of the above and below, and a happy ending. Because you arrive back where you began, but you're richer through the journey. So it's the arc of the eons. It's a wonderful riddle, and there's a lot of things to consider about it. What's in the model that I found most useful is the one by Sri Yukteswar, a great sage, and he postulated that the nadir, the base, when we sunk to the deepest part, which is called the Kali Yuga, was in around 500 AD. And after that point, which was the Dark Ages, and after that point, we've begun to ascend again. We began to move up, and we've been ascending ever since. And the process is really interesting when you get into the nitty-gritty, because in each yuga are sub-yugas of the whole map, almost like a hologram, and then each one of them, again, is another sub-yuga. So you can really look at patterns within patterns within patterns. And I'm not going into the details today. I want to give you a broad brushstroke idea. So at the moment we are in something called Dwapara Yuga, ascending Dwapara Yuga, as opposed to descending. And if you can imagine this, we used to be aware of the magic of life, the magical connection between all things, where matter and spirit were combined. So we were a bit of both. So we were able to manipulate matter in different ways, and we were more merged with the field of consciousness. And slowly, as the arc came down and we forgot the magic. We lost track of it until we sunk right into the material world, and we even forgot our divine origins entirely. And then we have to begin this ascent. And what's interesting about the ascent is different from the descent, because the descent is about the forgetting, it's about coming from a magical world and then forgetting that more and more and more. And then those magical practices just becoming kind of solidified or, hardened, which is what happened through many of the great religious practices and things. It's like, initially those were magical, reality things, but now they became more kind of ritualized until they were empty of anything, because we've fallen. So coming from the base up is about the climb up. It's to the magical through the material. So we actually have to ascend through the material realm, through mastering the material realm, which is why we now have science, and we have the different pattern of ascension. And what's interesting to me is when we consider like the yuga we're in now, which is Dwapara Yuga, where we are remembering and understanding the material plane more and more. And the next one is called Treta Yuga, and that's the one I wanted to just talk about for a little bit, because we're talking, a couple of thousand years from where we are now, just for the beginning of it, and then it will last many thousands of years. And I want to envisage what we are like in that future way, where we've remembered more of ourselves. And the way I want to do this is through some ideas. So imagine, I was running along a golf course yesterday, and I was imagining this. I saw because I was a golfer when I was younger, quite a good golfer. and it was a sport I really enjoyed. Not an easily understood sport by the outsider, but a real contemplative sport. It's just you alone, your swing, your rhythm, the ball, the hole. That's it. And it's all down to you. And so there's a purity to that. And the rhythm of your swing and all of that is just completely an unconscious thing. When you're in harmony, you swing the sweetest. It's the sweetest feeling when you connect with that ball. And there's so many kind of things that can make it not harmonious, so actually to become a master of any sport like that, you actually have to do it over and over and over again until that sweet spot has just become ingrained in you, and then you're searching for it over and over again. Anyway, in Treta Yuga, or the advanced humanity, what I saw was literally, every shot you took would be the sweet spot, because your shot would be in harmony with the Tao. So let's say, so you would get a hole in one every time. Every time you could reach the hole, the ball would go in the hole. And nowadays, probably the most hole in ones anyone's ever got in a single round of golf is maybe 2. I don't know if there's anyone who's ever done any more than that. It would be a miracle. It would be regarded as a miracle. But the perfection of technique, when the being is absolutely surrendered, suddenly makes the game no longer a game, because there's perfection. So every shot is in absolute harmony with all that is. So in a way, you could never lose, because if there were 2 of you, you'd be playing the perfect game. It would be different. You would arrive there in a different way, but it's unlikely you would beat each other, because it would be like those wonderful films where the great martial artists are kind of sparring together, and they are so equal in their mastery that no one wins. So this is the kind of what I was seeing as the future. And you could imagine that also in other things, like imagine running, because running's something I also love to do. And imagine you are in this immortal body, and you're beginning to realize it more and more. You could literally run for weeks without stopping, weeks without tiring, because your energy field would just be absorbing the energy field. It would be connecting to the quantum realm. And so you could draw all your sustenance from the quantum realm. The joy of the run itself would just nourish you. You wouldn't be expelling water from your body. You would just simply be in the rhythm and the flow, and any water that was going out, you would just draw back in through the atmosphere, through your aura. And so there would be this just pulse, this endless pulsing rhythm and flow, and you have that ability to just run and run and run and run and be in ecstatic bliss for forever. So it literally could go on forever. So that's like something to consider. Think about also teams in sport. Because I'm playing with sport as a way into this idea. Think about a football team or a cricket team or anything like that, and they're in this consciousness together. The perfection of the passing, of the movement, of the rhythm, of the flow, of the positioning of each player, in perfect synchronization with the whole. They would be unbeatable. They would be boring to play against, because you couldn't break them down, because every time you tried to find a weak spot, it would automatically move and shift into a spontaneous manifestation of another sequence or another pattern that was completely spontaneous. So nothing studied. And you might think of also swimming. You would be in Treta Yuga, you would be able to hold your breath underwater indefinitely. You'd be able to go down there underneath, and again just drawing breath from the inner being, from the inner core, so that there's this deep pulse coming from inside you. You'll be able to hold your breath for huge amounts of time and swim with the whales and the dolphins and see the fish and dive down to great depths without the pressure, because you'd be able to adjust your organs and so that they could handle the pressure as fish do. So these are all just things to consider, the possibilities. Think about music. You sit down to play the piano and you're in the Treta Yuga consciousness field, and you think of someone you love and you think of their soul, and immediately your hands will play the music of their soul. It would just come out because of your great love, and it will just emerge through the field as your hands. And I know many musicians will know that experience anyway. But what I want to say is that you don't even have to become a musician in Treta Yuga, because mastery would be kind of interchangeable. So you wouldn't have to actually even practice, because you'd be in the consciousness field. You could just sit down, never ever having played the piano, and then that person's soul or your love would come through your hands and your fingers. And there it would be, the greatest pieces of music. Think about architecture. The architect goes out into the landscape and looks at the landscape and sees the building that's there, and sees the perfect building that's grown out of the landscape, and it's already there in its wholeness. And so that architect, then all they have to do is recreate that in the material realm, because the imprint of it is there. It's just about seeing it, and it's in perfect harmony with that particular piece of the landscape, with the ley lines passing through it, and so the beauty of living in that place would be a place of pure harmony. Think of the craftsman. We know this already, the uncarved block. You take a block of wood or clay, and inside there, just through your love or your idea, suddenly the shape is there, and all you have to do with your hands is remove the parts of it that are not there, like Michelangelo's sculpture. So not the domain of just a few masters, but the domain of everyone who's ascending into this higher consciousness. And so I want to encourage this kind of thinking, this kind of contemplation, because what it does is it broadens up your horizons, your sense of boundlessness, your sense of what's possible. And we are in a different yuga right now, but to know where we're going gives a great perspective on where we are. It lightens your load in some way, to know that is what we truly are. We are magical beings, and step by step we're going to remember that, and we're going to regain those heightened states, those natural states in which the material and the spiritual come together, and we perfect the physical plane. We perfect ourselves, and we perfect our world, and we perfect our soul. That is the purpose of being here, the perfection of our souls and the perfection of all that is around us. So, some things to think about.